It was so much sillier than I thought it was. When I was trying, I mean,
for context, he announced it like an hour, 2 hours before we recorded last week.
Yeah,
the
right
same
before.
thing happened today. He has done another supposedly 4D chess move today, which we are now processing.
Which is actually pretty lucky. I am super glad that Trump is making these big announcements on Wednesday mornings.
So that us, real journalists, can get ahead of it.
Because if he announced them on Thursday, everything we say would be completely out of date. The tariff calculation, when he came out with the big board in the Rose Garden and said, this is what they charge us. It turns out that was a mathematical calculation based on basically imports minus exports divided by imports. It just basically said, if we buy more of their stuff than they buy of us, then that counts as them charging us a tariff. That's what they did. And they used that number, which is, again, I think made up, to charge them a reciprocal tariff. But a lot has happened since then, Aiden. We're in a fucking different world. So as of today, I say up until yesterday, markets were reacting horrendously. The stocks were plummeting. We're having red day after red day. There was one day where it started green. Everyone said, "Oh, what recession?" And then it went red by the end of the day. And they were, so it's been bad. And you might have mentioned this off pod or on pod, but one of the theories that has been espoused as to a reason why we might want these tariffs is that if the stock market is crashing, it is going to push everyone to buy U.S. bonds.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to go buy U.S. bonds. And when you buy them, it drives down our cost of borrowing so that we can refinance our many trillions of debt. That was one of the ideas espoused by Scott Bessent. Well, in the last few days, the opposite was happening. Our cost of borrowing was ramping up. It was getting more expensive. And it was largely because countries were dumping their U.S. treasuries. Japan was a major one. They were dumping them. So we were getting a rising U.S. long bond, and we were getting a crashing stock market, which is the worst of both worlds. So I don't know if this is 4D chess. I don't know what happened. But today, there was a big pivot because both those things were happening at once yesterday. Every tariff on any country that didn't retaliate is paused, except for a universal 10% tariff that is still staying on everyone.
So everybody still has the 10%?
Everybody still has a 10%.
Okay.
But if you didn't retaliate, if you're like Vietnam or something and you didn't retaliate, then we're getting rid of the 43 and it goes back down to 10.
Market rebounding.
Yes.
Switch tariff lifted.
Yes.
What recession?
Yeah, that's true.
So the market did have the biggest day in 60 years. It had a massive single green day. And Vietnam is down to a 10%. So a lot of things that like Twitch 2 are coming. But overall, still a 10%. Compared to the old world before all this, 10% on everybody. And China, which did retaliate, the war has now begun. The trade war has now begun. It was I'll give you a quick brief timeline. We announced Rose Garden, 34% tariffs on China. China goes, no, this is bullying or whatever. They said, fuck you. They announced 34% back. Trump says, big mistake, buddy. Announces an extra 50% on top of that. Total 104. Then today, when he removed on everybody else, he added more. So now we're at
just a couple hours ago, bringing the total to 125%, which when saw someone mention this in a message, I thought they were joking.
Yeah.
Because as we dove into last week, a direct personal business investment in how this Chinese tariff specifically shakes out in the next few months.
Yeah.
And I had a quick question for you.
Yeah.
Because one thought, I was trying to put into layman's terms, basic questions that I could ask you this week about kind of why this is going on. 125 to me, knowing that something like Chinese EVs already had 100% tariff on them before all this, and that's a big part, the main reason why Chinese EVs can't be sold in the US.
Right.
What is the point of raising something from 104 to 125? Aren't we already at a point where there's basically no reason to raise that? I don't understand.
What I will say is a 125% tariff is essentially a total trade decoupling.
Mm-hmm.
That is no good can really be sold profitably at 125% markup.
And is 104 not that already?
For some small goods, I think China is so much better at manufacturing, making certain nuts, bolts, certain thing that we have no factory comparable. So
yeah, if there is no alternative, then we'll still pay it for certain things.
Yeah, exactly. So it is the number is astronomically high though. It basically means total trade decoupling from us and China. And the only real big question that wasn't answered today, I just want to get this before we go back to China, is the EU did retaliate. So the EU, before today's announcement, did like a 25% counter tariff back on America. And then today we're like, our allies are good. God is good. We're back only on focusing on China. And someone yelled out the question, what about the EU? And they ignored it. So I don't know exactly. I don't know where we stand on that because EU is our massive trading partner, one of our biggest and the second biggest economy bloc. I don't know where we're standing on that because they said if you retaliated, we're keeping the tariff. So I don't know. That's the one that I will know by tomorrow. Maybe we don't know now.
Before I jump into my villain chair questions that I have this week.
Okay.
My first thought when I saw this was, wow, more immediate inconsistency. Like, this does nothing to fix the concerns around uncertainty. We just hit a 90-day pause on these tariffs for the majority of the countries that they were set on. This feels similar to the back and forth that was happening with Canada and Mexico at the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
And because it changes so frequently, it doesn't really give me removing the China factor from the situation and just thinking about this in a global sense, this doesn't really do anything for me personally.
Yeah,
I'm feeling settled.
I
can't imagine being the guy with a bunch of capital to make the investments in factories in America or wanting to make investments abroad and this being that comforting.
Yeah, I saw a great joke that was like, the guy who started a factory in America yesterday is feeling pretty stupid, right? The guy who saw these 40% tariffs and it's like, oh, I'll move to America. No one was actually doing that. But the argument that this is going to bring factory jobs from all these different countries to America seems pretty foolish now that it's up and down.
The Mug factory was getting built already.
Yeah, we were moving it. Enough mugs in America. Finally, we can bring those jobs back.
The thing is, it may happen with China. I mean, this China thing is the real thing because they can't sell in America now directly. I don't know what. It's a new world order.
I think we hadn't mentioned it last week too. Something interesting that I saw was they lifted the exception rule to where you could avoid tariffs by ordering directly from China for things valued under $800.
Yeah.
Which is how companies like Temu and I think Wish,
Shein,
made basically their entire business model was based off of that
small
existing.
Orders. Yeah.
And now that exception is gone.
Yeah, I had a chatter who's I think works at the North American branch of Shein, and he talked to his boss, and they were like, "Yeah, I mean, if this doesn't get figured out, we're fucked." there's no way to do that profitably. Everything is 100% more expensive. So I don't know. I think it's a good time actually to just jump into this. I want to.
Oh, you want to show that Scott Bessent?
Oh yeah, show that. Show that for the today's announcement.
Interesting thing here. So Scott Bessent, as far as I can tell, correct me if you guys have heard others. There's like three main players in the Trump administration who are advocating for tariffs. Essentially everyone else, including all the people on the right, hate them. There is Scott Bessent, who's the Secretary of Treasury.
Yeah.
There is Howard Lutnick.
You hate his name.
I'm kidding. Howard Lutnick. He's the Commerce Secretary. And then there is Peter Navarro, who's a senior advisor to the White House.
Yeah.
So Howard Lutnick, having watched a little more of his stuff, seems to be a hype man with no substance.
Yeah, I hate that guy.
I was trying to maybe give the benefit of the doubt. Any question he's asked about tariffs, he's just like, American people are going to be so stoked. And it's like, no, that's not what we were asking.
He also, he specifically said, and this is the first time I've seen a Commerce Secretary do this. He said to camera, you should buy Tesla. It's undervalued. Like he said a specific stock you should buy then, and it's down from there. So like you can't do that. You can't pick and choose as Commerce Secretary specific stocks to pump.
Peter Navarro is advocating a whole bunch for tariffs. He supposedly is like the big guy that is convincing Trump about the value of tariffs. And I listened to an interview with him on CBS, I believe, and then again, doesn't really answer the questions. And he has this belief when asked about how long it would take manufacturers to move factories to America. He's like, I don't want to hear about it during COVID. We got things set up in 2 months. It's not going to take years. So he has this belief that like America can remanufacture factories in a couple months if we wanted to.
He also, Peter Navarro, has over half a dozen books where he quoted an economist named Ron Vara to make up a justification for some of his beliefs. Ron Vara is his last name rearranged. It's made up. He made up this person. This has been exposed. He has made up a source that's himself. So again, I'm not 2 out of the 3 I don't like. But if you get to Scott Bessent,
that's beast mode. No, that's beast mode.
That's some Harry Potter, Voldemort, Tom Riddle.
He's in the Chamber of Secrets, whipping up the reasons for why this is actually
and then Trump found his journal and has been reading from it and learning about tariffs.
He's been talking.
Yeah, he's been talking to the bathroom
every night. That's
lonely Trump finally found Navarro's journal. Yeah, Peter Navarro. He recently has been saying that car manufacturers are just assembly lines here in the U.S. and they need to start making everything here. And he talks about how Elon has been advocating against tariffs and saying there should be free trade.
Right.
He's been pushing back. Navarro has gotten into a tiff and said, well, Elon is a car guy and they should be manufacturing everything here in America. This so upset Elon, who, to Tesla's credit, they do make most stuff in America. They're fairly integrated here, is now calling Peter Navarro publicly on Twitter Peter Retardo.
Yes.
And so that's the new, he's now using like Trump-esquian slurs against the people in the cabinet. So there's this strange kind of fracturing happening.
It's a big fracture.
It's very, very strange.
It is so awesome to watch 2 high-level government officials act like the people in my CS solo queue games.
Yeah.
That's insane. That is, maybe it's not awesome.
Maybe Elon should have covered B-site. That's all he's saying. Right?
Yeah. So, however, we do have an opper here. His name is Scott Bessent. So, Scott Bessent, Secretary of Treasury. Atrioc, please elaborate more about his policies.
I like Scott Bessent. Of all the options that could have been picked, I think he's a reasonable, smart guy. I think he's got a background in what he's talking about. I read his stuff before he ever was part of this administration and thought he had. It is funny, though, because when I read his stuff, he used to be like, yeah, tariffs are pretty fucking stupid. And now he's in the administration, and I think he has to toe the line. But he might be like, I don't know, an operative on the inside who's like he has to cozy up to Trump and say the nice things, but he's like trying to get reason to what we're doing. And so this is his statement.
Yeah, so he last week was advocating for everything about how tariffs are great, how this is good. He was advocating how if we bring the bond yield down, that's going to allow us to refinance debt and save a whole bunch of money on the debt.
Which didn't happen, just to be clear.
Yeah, which didn't happen. If you pull this up, Perry, so this is him after a straight week, right, of talking about how tariffs are brilliant. This is Trump's plan. We're going to do this. Here's the video.
Okay.
And all this was, again, this was driven by the president's strategy. He and I had a long talk on Sunday, and this was his strategy all along. And that, you might even say that he goaded China into a bad position. They responded. They have shown themselves to the world to be the bad actors.
Damn. Okay.
Wait, keep going. There's a little bit more.
Yeah.
And we are willing to cooperate with our allies,
with our
trading partners who did not retaliate. It wasn't a hard message.
Okay. It's like, dude, if like we were hanging out, right?
Yeah.
At like a basketball court, whatever, and then I pull out a gun and I start pointing at you guys, say, I'm gonna shoot you, right? And Atrioc, you say, hey, please don't shoot me, right? Please don't. I'll do whatever you want. And Aiden pulls out his own gun and says, I'll shoot you back if you shoot me. Don't fucking do that. And I put the gun away and I say, that was a test. Aiden, you're not a good friend. I'm only hanging out.
That is a perfect example.
I'm only hanging out with Atrioc from now on.
He's my ally.
Yeah, he's my ally.
And in this case, if we were following this with the EU example, Atrioc also pulled a gun out and said he was the same thing, but you're still friends with him.
No, it's crazy because I've talked about this before, and I want to do a little presentation about why possibly coordinated tariffs on China may make sense. There could be a reason for it. But the idea that this was all a master plan to get us and our allies, no, we want allies. We pissed off everybody. I got a video we may be able to pull up of like the Australian PM. Australia buys more of our stuff than we do of theirs. They're not even in the weird formula they used, Australia is our friend. We still put 10% on them. There's Singapore, same thing. All their leaders are like, this sucks. We're mad at you. And that's supposed to be our allies that we like let off the hook. It's crazy. I mean, there's nobody in any country that's like more friendly to us. We still have long-standing relationships that haven't totally dissolved that can sort of be allies here. Again, I can see the rationale behind a China tariff. I think this is like a last ditch, oh shit, everything was breaking. Because again, when the stocks are down and the bond yields are up, and I want to explain that right now because you asked for a little bit more of a clarification. I think when people say the word bond, people's eyes start to glaze over. And when you say bond yield, people's eyes roll back in their head.
Yeah, I think this is a good thing to explain. Like, in general, because I think a lot of people don't know about this stuff to begin with. And then for me specifically, like my main interaction with this stuff is I bought some treasury bonds last year.
Yeah.
So how does this work?
At one point, you had a portfolio, 50% treasury bonds, 50% CSGO knives.
Yeah, the most responsible portfolio. And guess what? That portfolio right now would be holding up.
That's true. I think you and Warren Buffett have the same strategy. Okay, so quick primer. If you're a rich person or a pension fund or a government, someone with a lot of fucking money, I'm cursing a lot today, you could pick a lot of things to invest in because you don't want to hold it in cash.
Right.
So you could put it in stocks, you can put it in bonds, you can put it in gold, you can put it in real estate. And what bonds are essentially IOUs from governments. They pay you back, okay? A lot of time, especially lately, people have been putting their money into stocks because they've been going up. They've had so many good years. A lot of money's been in stocks. But the idea is, based on historical patterns, when stocks have a bad period, when they're crashing, when they're down, people flee to safety. So they go to things like real estate, gold, bonds. And bonds has always been the bigger one of the three.
And correct me if I'm wrong, bonds generally are going to be lower yield, but it's lower risk, right? It's like if you just want safe money that's pretty much guaranteed, that's where you go to, but stocks is the higher return.
Exactly. Bonds are guaranteed. So if you buy an IOU from the government, if you're America and you're like, can I borrow $100 million and I give it to you, you offer me a guaranteed 4%.
And historically, I think the idea is that American bonds are the best thing you could be putting your money in because, the dollar is the reserve currency. It has the U.S. government behind it.
Yeah.
It's basically a guaranteed return with no risk, whatever that return happens to be.
Exactly. And the way bonds work, this is where it gets a little confusing. It's like an auction system. So I say, I'm the U.S. government. I need to borrow $100 million. I'll offer you 2% interest. And everyone goes, crickets. They say no. And I say, well, I'll offer you 2.5%. Crickets. I say 3. Crickets. I say 4. They go, all right, I'll buy some. And they buy some of our debt. So the more demand there is for bonds, the lower that auction, the more easier it is for me to get a low yield. I can go for 2% and then everyone buys it. That's not what would happen. That's why it's so crazy. Because that was the big idea of tariffs. Is like, okay, we're going to crash the stock market, but everyone's going to buy US debt and we're going to get a real low interest payment.
And this idea of it being refinanced at a lower rate, from my understanding, is that if bonds are available right now, and we can list those bonds at a lower rate, but the economic situation elsewhere is dire enough, it doesn't matter that the rate on the bonds is 1% or lower.
Yeah.
People will want to buy those bonds, which is refinancing the debt at a lower rate than what it's been sold at for the last couple of years during inflation.
They don't want to lose money in stocks. Everything else is unpredictable, but I can get a guaranteed 1% or 2% from America. I'll buy their bonds.
And the reason that's so relevant right now is because we are ridiculously far in debt.
Yeah.
We owe a bunch of money. We have to raise more money to keep paying down the debt. So if the U.S. government can raise money via bonds while paying less because the bonds are low, that saves the U.S. government a ton of money.
A ton of
like massive amounts of money.
Interest expense is like almost as big as our military budget right now. So we really need to get the interest expense down. So that was the idea. The problem is people were not buying American bonds. They just weren't doing it. In fact, they were selling them, which drives up, makes the bar, you have to go 4.5%, 5%. So it was rising because Japan was dumping. China technically didn't dump, but a lot of people were dumping. And so it was creating the opposite effect. And when both things are bad, it's chaos. I mean, it's like, it could break the whole system. So I think that's why he panicked today.
This was my big question for you, is that I think that was the part I did not understand. So from my perspective, as somebody who's bought a treasury before, a bond, could I have sold it for the period of time that I had it? Like the right to get the payout?
Yeah.
And why does them selling their bonds is it because they're selling bonds that they bought at the 4 or 5% during inflation? So if the government's selling at the time, they have to offer similarly high rates?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
That's exactly what it is. They're selling their bonds. People can just buy it from them. They don't need to buy it from America at whatever rate. So you have to go higher to off. That's the idea. So, probably more than anyone needs to know, but a good way to understand the plumbing of the financial system and what was happening and why it was so chaotic as of yesterday. Because the bonds were spiking, the stocks were going down, and that is a terrible double combo that needed something to change because it could get disastrous. So now we're into the situation.
People were flooding into the doubloon market.
No, not even kidding. So we have our little stock game where we all drafted some stocks. The number one stock yesterday in the whole competition was gold, was just gold.
Oh, the gold stock is just directly tied to the value of gold.
Bricks of gold was number one because everything was chaotic. That's not true today because everything's bounced back, but as of yesterday.